Thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate braving the traffic on I-5, which none of us like. I'll get this opened up here. So as Sarah mentioned, I'm the Puget Sound TMDO coordinator and the project manager for the Puget Sound Nutrient Source Reduction Project. And I'm going to describe to you a little bit today about what this is and what to expect over the coming years. Oh, and I need my script. Excellent. Okay, so I want to start by visually orienting you all to the area that we're talking about today, which is the Puget Sound specifically, although the Salish Sea model does include more than just that. The map on the left shows the numeric criteria for dissolved oxygen in different parts of the sound. So you can see the kind of cyan color is the 7 milligrams per liter, and the down to the blue and the red in a few of those urbanized inlets and streams like Budd Inlet and Commencement Bay. And the map on the right shows 141 Category 5 waters that are impaired for dissolved oxygen. Those are the red boxes there. And you can see how those are kind of distributed a lot towards the south Puget Sound. And the yellow boxes on the map on the right are the Category 2 waters of concern for dissolved oxygen. That's where we have data that is trending towards being impaired, but it doesn't meet all of our criteria for being Category 5. But those are kind of like the watch list. So we've had monitoring data from the last several decades that have identified DO problems. And that data was used to add these impaired waters to our 303D list. And that's the list that we work off of for developing TMDLs or addressing other water quality problems. In 2006, Ecology began developing the South and Central Puget Sound GEMS model, and that work was published in a series of reports that are available on our website. Many of those authors are here today as well. These reports found that nutrients from all local human sources were causing violations of our state water quality standards for dissolved oxygen, and they found that there's a seasonality to nutrient loading between marine and watershed sources. This is all on top of the nutrient loading coming from the ocean. Oops. Additional features were needed, and a larger, more comprehensive model was built. The Salish Sea model that Heather mentioned was developed by Pacific Northwest National Labs in collaboration with Ecology's Environmental Assessment Program and with EPA to meet this need, to have this larger scope and more comprehensive look at the sound. You'll all hear more from the developers of the model this afternoon, so I'm not going to go too much into that now, other than to say that this Salish Sea model is going to be our primary analytical tool to evaluate nutrients in DO. Now, the Puget Sound Nutrient Source Reduction Project, I've spent the last year or so initiating this project, doing some initial scoping and design to put this together and get our agency behind that. I'm thinking about this project in kind of 3 distinct phases. This first phase that we're in now is all about communication, and it's intended to bring a mutual understanding of the problem and the issues, and to build support for phases 2 and 3 when we get into determining what the solutions need to be and implementing those solutions. And because of the large scope of this issue, and the complexity of the science, and the importance that we fully understand the problem, we must emphasize communication and dialogue with stakeholders, agencies, tribes, environmental groups, and the public. At the heart of the DO problem are nutrients, and nutrients affect multiple aspects of Puget Sound's health. Today we're hearing about several of those linkages in an effort to understand what the biological response to nutrient reductions could be. So understand this is going to be a multi-year project, and communication was going to continue throughout the life of this project, and this dialogue is the first part of this phase. So how do we move forward in a way that is informed by science and includes the knowledge and experience of every one of you and others in the region who conduct research or create policy or make management decisions? Well, we want your input to the discussion. Let's talk about all the different science that will be presented today and that will be continued to be developed. Learn from each other, and keep in mind that we all want to restore and protect the integrity and resiliency of Puget Sound. I'm going to be engaging with all of your organizations over this course of this year and next to further this discussion and scope out a way to engage with other Puget Sound recovery efforts, to make sure that we come up with a plan that meets our goals and that fits in nicely with all of the other stormwater, habitat, shellfish issues, and that are covered in that kind of broad array of Puget Sound recovery. And I encourage all of you to come up and talk to me during breaks or sometime throughout the day, or to send me emails later. I'm going to be setting up listening sessions with different groups. So to make sure, if you want us to come talk with you and to hear your concerns and listen to your ideas and the issues that you have, let me know. So a significant sideboard guiding this project is our obligation under the Federal Clean Water Act and the State Water Pollution Control Act to protect water quality and designated uses. Puget Sound is complex, and DO problems vary depending on where you are in the sound. Circulation and watershed flow conditions matter, and there are seasonal differences that must be taken into account. We'll use the robust Salish Sea model to understand the complexity of the system and use its power to understand what water quality would be like without human sources. The model is the best way to understand the natural condition, or what we're calling the reference condition. This afternoon, our panel members will talk about the reference condition and using the model to determine that, so stay tuned for that. But it's really important that the recovery goal that we use adequately describes what healthy looks like, and the definition of that is kind of buried into that reference condition. We need to know what our goal is for recovery. So keep in mind that this applies to dissolved oxygen, and we use the model to determine what combination of nutrient load reductions are going to get us to within the human allowance of 0.2 milligrams per liter so that human sources can't lower the reference condition by more than 0.2 milligrams per liter. Ultimately, our goal is the protection of the aquatic life designated uses and the aesthetic uses. Connecting the model output to the biological response is where this gets to be an interdisciplinary issue, and as you're all going to learn today, there's a lot of connections that nutrients has on Puget Sound's health and ecology. So, as Heather repeated earlier, we don't have all of the answers for what's going to happen. As this project progresses into phase 2 next year, we will need your help with your understanding of your different systems to identify creative and meaningful solutions to reach our shared water quality goals. As we improve our understanding of the role of nutrients and other aspects of Puget Sound's ecology, we will identify additional benefits that these solutions could provide to restore and protect the health of Puget Sound now and into the future. We must also make sure that the solutions we invest in as a region will result in real environmental benefits that we expect and that we're planning for. So that's where the Salish Sea model comes in. The Salish Sea model gives us the analytical power to evaluate potential solutions and determine their efficacy. One of the primary success metrics that we must evaluate is, does the suite of key actions meet our water quality goals? So there are many constraints that reality puts on this project, both financially, environmentally, and politically. We want and need your input to find meaningful solutions given these constraints in order to minimize or mitigate them and to the maximum extent practicable while still meeting our requirements and objectives. This is a diagram here of the Salish Sea model domain. So you can see it includes the coast all the way up to the northern part of Vancouver Island, all of the Georgia Straits, and even down into the Columbia River. So what we developed together is going to be a list of key actions that will be informed by stakeholders, balanced by analyses that provide a significant degree of certainty, and tracked with performance measures. And hopefully, will reduce the financial side of the equation as much as possible by aligning effective actions with funding assistance and justification for those investments. It's highly probable that solutions are going to touch on both point and non-point sources of nutrients. Necessity may drive the sequencing and scheduling of actions, and in all likelihood, it could take a decade or more to implement those solutions. As we progress through the project, we may need to do some course correcting to adapt to climate change and regional population growth. We will need to learn from continued water quality monitoring and new studies to understand how Puget Sound responds to these changes and these nutrient reduction strategies. We need to stay adaptable and continue to be informed by the best available science as we sail forward together, aligning our courses so that we're all sailing in the same direction. So, it's a fairly broad overview. Any questions to start off with? I guess we can just go ahead and launch right into that. We've got several minutes here for questions. Yeah, Lincoln, let's get Melissa the microphone here so we can pick up the audio.
And if I can have you introduce yourself as you ask the question, that'd be helpful for everybody else.
Okay, my name's Lincoln Lohr. I'm a retired oceanographer, and I just think with all of this effort on the DO standards, it's worth also re-examining the validity of the DO standards. And EPA has marine DO standards for Cape Cod to Cape Hatteras that are numerically a lot lower than ours. They also have a certain range where you would start to look at issues of duration and frequency in evaluating the standards. We've got the 7, 6, and 5 that you show up there are kind of fanciful, imaginary numbers created a long time ago. The 0.2 milligram per liter is really the only part of the standard that you can address or should address. And it's probably more stringent than necessary. I don't think you've got a good justification for the standard at the moment, and looking at it would be a good idea.
Yeah, that's a good question, and something that we've been thinking about as I've looked at the criteria that were developed for Chesapeake Bay. They went in and redesignated their use areas in a way that I think makes a little more sense than kind of what we have now. And those numeric criteria may be good on the surface, but there's a range of DO from highest on the surface to the lowest at the bottom. And that single number doesn't really allow us to take that into account right now. So we've got that 0.2 milligram per liter allowance for human sources, the total human sources to lower DO by that amount. And that does give us some powerful ways to evaluate whether or not we have violations. When we use the model, and we'll see more about that this afternoon, but we can use the model to compare that reference condition, absent human sources, with a current condition to determine if those human sources that are the only thing really changing in those two models are changing or lowering DO by more than 0.2 at any place within the domain of the model, both horizontally and vertically. So that is a good, powerful way to evaluate that. The question still remains, though, is the number protective of the designated uses, and is that the right number to use? So I think, well, we don't want to either set our limits at the point of lethality. I think we want to be protective so that there's some buffer in there, so that we're not saying that the standard is at the lethal threshold for DO, whatever that happens to be, of course. And I know you aren't suggesting that, but I think that this conversation on the numbers that we're using will continue.
Mindy, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Mindy Roberts, I'm the Puget Sound Director for the Washington Environmental Council. And I guess I have a different perspective than Lincoln on this. On the water quality standard, is now really the time that we would want to loosen the standard? And while some may see that as stringent, it is intended to be protective. So I guess my question is, are you aware of any other process that's actually started a nutrient reduction study that at the same time is also trying to loosen the standard? In other words, it's like being pulled over for speeding on I-5. Is that really the time that you're going to say, I think that the speed limit should be higher and looser? Just curious if that's ever happened anywhere else.
I'm not familiar with that. I believe the sequencing of events with the Chesapeake Bay dissolved oxygen TMDL development was first starting with reevaluating their criteria and uses and where those applied and refining that process. Now, that takes time and would definitely extend the schedule for this project. My goal is that we work with what we have now to identify the priority things that we need to begin embarking on. And when it comes to point or non-point sources, there's going to be kind of a ramp up in time of when we say what needs to be done towards it actually being implemented and completed and doing the nutrient reduction that we need it to do. So what we're hoping to do is use this anthropogenic allowance as our tool to identify those sums of the human sources, and then begin to kind of figure out, well, how do we divvy that up amongst all of those point and non-point sources? So I want to make sure that we can get things moving as quickly as possible towards solutions, but recognizing, that we might need to make changes and refine things as we move forward.
There's another question. Dave Peeler, introduce yourself, even though I just did.
Yeah, thank you. Dave Peeler, Deschutes Estuary Restoration Team and retired environmental manager. Dustin, you're aware, of course, that South Puget Sound model and the Bud Inlet model are used to estimate conditions and loadings to Bud Inlet and Capitol Lake area, and a TMDL is underway. Given the 141 listings that you mentioned for marine waters throughout Puget Sound for DO, et cetera, are there other TMDLs that are about to begin or underway elsewhere in the Puget Sound Basin?
For marine,
related to nutrients for marine waters.
For marine waters, no. Because the Bud Inlet dissolved oxygen TMDL has been in development for a while, and we are wanting to get some answers from that to inform DES's decision on management of Capitol Lake. We are keeping that kind of a separate but equal project, where we're using the Salish Sea model to inform the boundary conditions going into Bud Inlet, and we'll use the Bud Inlet model to evaluate those management actions and their effects on DO in Bud Inlet. But the two models are kind of working together. And then the Puget Sound Nutrient Source Reduction Project, with the Bud Inlet, what we're looking at is figuring out what all of the external sources to Bud Inlet are coming into that. And then the Puget Sound project will make sure that the solutions that we come up with are going to meet that boundary condition going into Bud Inlet. And so Leanne Weiss, who is the TMDL lead for that, thank you, Leanne, she and I have been working together and will continue to collaborate and make sure that we're staying connected on those things.
Maybe
that-
one more question, or not? Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Enjoy the day.